Jeremy Corbyn once said, "I think NATO is a Cold War product. I think NATO historically should have shut up shop in 1990 along with the Warsaw Pact. Unfortunately, it did not." Keep this in mind as we discuss today NATO new target, which is China. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Here's the question of the day. Here it is, 2021, and the Cold War supposedly is over, and we have NATO searching for something to do. What do you think of all that?
Well, that's correct, Ross. This one came about a meeting that took place a few months ago at NATO headquarters in Brussels, in which, guess what came at the top of the agenda? China. So that means what? It's the policy of NATO that for the next, for 2030 is going to now be aiming at China. And that in itself is a shift in policy towards what we're going to be seeing, almost like replacing the Soviet Union with China.
It seems that that NATO, to justify even its existence, has to have an enemy.
That is true, and that's what it looks like. But mind you, we need to address, just for our viewers to know, some historical facts that have described the tense relationship between NATO and China. Of course, the Chinese never forgot two main things. One of them on May 7th, 1989, which was the Tiananmen Square incident, in which the West have issued sanctions, an arms embargo on China. And the second main event, which was a decade later, was on May 4th, 1999, which was NATO's bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade.
Which was a horrible mistake, and NATO apologized profusely for it, but the Chinese have no reason to forgive it. They bombed an embassy.
That is correct, because the Chinese have never forgot that, and they said that there is no way NATO will make a mistake for something like that one. So, but the point in all this is it's not about just that, which I am certain, given the culture of China, they will never forget that. The thing now is why all of a sudden NATO is shifting its sights on China, given the economic progress China is doing, given the upgrade in military hardware of China. And also given that, is it time for NATO to consider another enemy, so-called Cold War, to justify its existence? Those are the key questions that we need to ask.
Well, we certainly see that Russia is on the move, Crimea, Georgia, and so on. What's your opinion of all that?
Well, interesting enough that you mentioned about Georgia, because NATO is considering inviting Georgia as a member of NATO. Whoa. Georgia is in the next door to Russia. And this in itself gives the Chinese open their eyes on saying, look, if they are doing this to Russia, can you imagine what they're going to do to us? But the idea of inviting Georgia to become a NATO member, I would say it's a bad policy. Because here is where the issue. If you invite Georgia, then you're going to have to invoke Article 5. Should there be a war? If Georgia is attacked by the Russians, guess what? NATO will have to get engaged militarily. Do we want to engage the Russians?
You know, we see these kind of entanglements, including World War I, which was a hopeless entanglement, and a war that shouldn't have happened. And so now we have the possibility of Georgia being instrumental in creating a horrible mess.
Well, exactly, because when former President Mikhail Saakashvili was the Georgian president, he was pushing for that policy towards having Georgia join NATO? Of course, because the West was pushing him into that direction. But also the consequences of that. And we saw this during the war between Russia and Georgia in South Ossetia. They did have a problem back then when the former president, Mikhail Saakashvili, miscalculated, thinking that the first time a shot will be fired, the West is going to come to his rescue. It did not.
Let me read from one of my favorite authors. It's you.
Oh,
Russia's critics now speculate on what Moscow will do now that it has annexed Crimea and defeated the forces in Georgia after the latter's former president,
Mikhail Saakashvili. Yeah.
I'm not going to try that one, made the mistake of sending troops into the rebellious province of South Russia and defeating the Georgian army. I highlight this incident because
Saakashvili.
because of his recent statement, Russia's most likely target in the near future is either Finland or Sweden. This raises serious concern about his judgment. I disagree with the former Georgian president because Russia will not want to risk inviting NATO troops to its northern borders.
Well, that makes more sense. That makes more sense, Ross. There is no way. Saakashvili was sort of hurt by his feeling, hurt by how quick a defeat came from the Russians, because it took the Russians 5 days and took over Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and they became part of Russia. So Saakashvili miscalculated that if the first shot is fired, the West is going to come to his rescue. It did not. The West is not going to risk a war with Russia, a strong nuclear power.
Exactly.
And that's where his miscalculations. So for him to state that Russia is going to invade Finland or Sweden, it's nonsense. The reason being because Russia understands if they ever consider that, NATO is going to have to move in. And you can just see where this is going. So I kind of disagreed with his statement back then when I wrote the book that this is nonsense, because that gives me an idea that he does not understand the geopolitical game of how Russia is going to react to something like that.
Well, no doubt, China is eyeing this situation very closely.
Well, China, of course, they're going to have to think into this. Mind you, that the relationship between China and Russia was sort of cooperative at times, but worse at others. The interesting thing is that China and NATO have cooperated after 9/11. And why is that? It's because China saw it's a win-win situation for China. Hey, we may as well cooperate with NATO in targeting terrorism in Afghanistan and the Middle East, so China won't have to be dealing with a domestic uprising of its Muslim minority. So, however, things have turned south in 2009 when you start to hear some sort of rhetoric from Washington as far as being harsh on China. We saw it even for the last few years.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and now we are living through it with the trade. As a matter of fact, recently, President Biden has stated that he will not lift the trade barriers with China. So you can just see. So NATO felt that is pushed by Washington with some harsh rhetoric towards China to ensure that. But NATO also is going to run into a problem. And the problem is from within Europe. Because in Europe you get countries like Germany, France, of course, the key players. But also you get the EU. The EU wants to do business in China.
So I think there are 27 members of...
That is correct.
And what we're looking at is 27 different agendas.
You're absolutely correct, Ross. Because now there are some countries, especially in the Eastern Bloc, they're going to be thinking, okay, if NATO shifts its priority towards China, what's going to be happening with Russia?
Right, and we're certainly seeing a closer and closer alliance between Russia and China.
Oh, that's even playing on a much larger scale, because as of now, that is just a basic relationship. Yes, they do conduct military exercises together. It's not an alliance yet. I argued in my last book about Russia that it will be just a matter of time before both Moscow and Beijing will realize that it is to their best interest if they get into a military alliance. China usually will get more out of it than Russia. That's the way I see it playing out moving forward.
Well, business-wise, there's no doubt that China harbors any number of geniuses. You know, you go to someplace like Vancouver, which I did a major consulting project, a 6-month consulting project in Vancouver, and you should see China's influence in Vancouver.
Wow.
It looks like you're in Hong Kong. And they influence all the activities in that city. Amazing. Yeah. So we see the focus of NATO, maybe even justifying its existence, going China, China, China. What do you think of that?
Well, it's because now that's like the war on terrorism. So now the war on terrorism has to be replaced by a new enemy, if you will. So who's the enemy now?
China.
So, and this is when NATO is going that direction, because that's the only way for them to justify their existence. Otherwise, what will be the role of NATO?
Well, here it comes to our bottom line, and that is the United States primarily pays for NATO. And how long are the American people going to suffer from lack of infrastructure, lack of, and NATO is being supported? When do you think that the Europeans are going to be able to take care of themselves? Bottom line.
And that is a fair question, Ross, because
yeah.
at some point we're going to have to say, okay, how much can we be defending you? It's not like forever, because you got enough countries there that they can increase their military spending, or their military budget, that is, and they can defend themselves, because it's costing us here at home at the expense of American people, at your expense, at my expense, at Ross's expense, at all of us. And I'm not anti-NATO at all. I mean, the alliance had served the purpose, but that purpose has reached its shelf life, if you will.
You take a look at the top 10 economies in the world, and the majority of them are Northern European. The productivity of those people, enormous. Can they take care of themselves? That's up for grabs. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other videos. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
As always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.